The modern human being's greatest nightmare is not poverty, illness, or even the finite nature of life. The real terror, the one that freezes us in place, is the loss of control. We live in the age of obsessive micromanagement of our own destiny. We draw up budgets for the next 5 years. We take out life insurance, we calculate the fastest routes, and we weigh the risks of every decision, however small. Our entire civilization is one gigantic, pulsing monument to the human attempt to keep both hands firmly on the wheel. But what if that wheel were not connected to anything? What if all our effort to steer reality is just a child playing in the back seat of a car, while somebody else is actually driving? That doubt led us to an experiment. We decided to use the processing power of the artificial intelligence axiom to analyze a concept that, for centuries, belonged only to theologians and mystics. We asked the system a single, fundamental question: what happens to a human being if he totally, absolutely, and 100% voluntarily gives up his own will and entrusts his life to a higher power, the one many people call God? And before this starts to sound like a sermon, what we did was translate the concept of surrender into the cold language of logic, game theory, and neurobiology. And the results the machine handed us are shocking. They go against our most basic instinct for self-preservation, and they demolish the conventional logic of success. But they may also be the only way out of the maze we have walked ourselves into. The machine's answer only makes sense once we understand what trusting in God means to an algorithm. Most people picture it as passive waiting. I'm not going to do anything, I'll just let it all sort itself out. The system rejects that interpretation flatly. Passivity is classified as an error, an absence of data. Many people think trust is inertia, but the system showed that it is the opposite. It is the active, voluntary, second-by-second removal of our own script from events. Our consciousness works like a stage. At the center of it works a tireless screenwriter we can call the ego. That screenwriter's job is to predict the future and to protect the image you hold of yourself. He is forever writing and rewriting the script with the same questions as always, like, how do I make more money? Or, what are people going to think of me if I do this? Or, how can I avoid pain and embarrassment? This process eats up as much as 90% of your brain's resources. We asked the system to simulate what would happen if the user forcibly fired that screenwriter. Not merely suspended him, but removed him from the play for good. In theology, this is called the death of the old self. In our analysis, it is a critical reset to factory settings. The first thing the simulation revealed is a colossal explosion of anxiety, something very close to a panic attack, and this is crucial to understand. Whoever decides to truly trust a higher power does not find peace right off the bat. The first feeling is pure terror. And why? Because as far as your biological programming is concerned, giving up control is the same as giving up on life. The activity graphs for the amygdala, our internal alarm, go through the roof. Your primitive brain screams, if you don't solve this problem right now, we are going to die. The trust protocol, however, demands that you ignore that signal. It is like falling backward into an abyss without seeing the bottom. The only instruction is to open your arms and relax. Mathematically, renouncing the ego means zeroing out a crucial variable in the equation of your life. That variable is your desire for reality to match your expectations. You want the day to be sunny, your boss to be kind, the traffic to flow. When reality does not match that variable, the result is suffering. The intensity of the suffering is exactly the gap between what you expected and what you got. By activating the protocol of total trust, we force the value of that variable to 0. What do you want? Nothing. How do you want things to happen? However they happen. To a results-driven mind, this is madness, except that the data revealed a completely unexpected pattern. The moment personal expectation is zeroed out, the equation of life stops throwing errors. The conflict disappears. An analysis of millions of biographies, from the ancient Stoics to survivors of concentration camps, showed the same thing. At the point where a person acknowledged their total powerlessness and handed command over to an outside force, Something strange happened. Subjective time slowed down. Chaos began to organize itself into a structure. But what are we handing over in the end? We are handing over an illusion. The probability that your life 10 years from now will look exactly the way you planned it today is less than 0.01%. We do not control the economy, the cells in our body, other people's thoughts, and most of the time, not even our own thoughts. Our control is a fiction. We are passengers clutching a plastic steering wheel glued to the front seat, convinced that we are driving the bus. The trust protocol is the moment you realize the wheel is a toy, rip it off and throw it out the window. Once the toy steering wheel has gone out the window, the simulation takes us somewhere deeper still. We leave psychology behind and dive into the dark, damp, electrically active matter that weighs 3 pounds inside your skull. We are talking about the human brain. We asked the system a question of disarming simplicity. We wanted to know what the brain of a person who trusts God absolutely actually looks like. Not in words or in Sunday rituals, but second by second, at the level of biological reflexes. Thousands of terabytes of data were analyzed, scans of Tibetan monks in deep meditation, electroencephalograms of Catholic nuns in prayer, and even autopsy records of ascetics from the past. What the artificial intelligence found forces us to rethink what we consider normal. Modern medicine treats a state of mild chronic stress as the norm. Your brain is a survival machine, evolutionarily programmed to hunt for threats. But the brain of someone in a state of absolute trust is a biological anomaly. It is a device running against its own factory settings. The first and most shocking finding concerns the amygdala. That small region deep in the brain is our built-in danger radar. In the 21st century human being, that amygdala is white hot. It scans reality non-stop. Somebody cut me off in traffic. Danger. My boss gave me a funny look. Threat of starvation. The stock market dropped. Threat to stability. That radar sends continuous signals to the adrenal glands, which pump cortisol and adrenaline into your blood. You live inside a chemical cocktail of fear. Even when you are asleep, your internal alarm keeps blinking. But when we look at the brain model of someone who has activated the "Thy will be done" protocol, we see the impossible. The amygdala is silent. It does not merely reduce its activity. In moments of maximum trust, it all but unplugs itself from the power source. This is the shutdown of the predator circuit. A person like that stops reacting biologically to potential future threats. You tell them, tomorrow you could lose everything, and their pulse does not quicken by a single beat. And this is not apathy or stupidity. The information is processed, the logic works, but the animal fear never fires. From an evolutionary standpoint, an individual like that should be the first one eaten. If you do not fear the rustling in the bushes, the tiger gets you. But in the modern world, where the tigers are mortgages and neuroses, switching off the amygdala confers a colossal advantage. A gigantic amount of energy is freed up. And where does it go? The resources are rerouted to the prefrontal cortex, the zone responsible for higher thought, for creativity, and for empathy. An ordinary person spends 80% of their processing capacity running negative scenarios. What if I get sick? What if they leave me? The one who lives in absolute trust does not run those variations. For him, the future is a restricted access area under the administrator's management. This brings us to a second finding, a shift in the brain's electrical activity. Right now, your brain is probably running on the beta rhythm, the frequency of alertness, of logic, but also of anxiety. Between alertness and deep sleep lies a narrow, mystical band, the theta rhythm. It is the state of deep trance, of hypnosis, that magical moment between sleeping and waking when the big ideas show up. The ordinary person passes through it for only a few minutes a day. The brain of someone living in total trust, however, is able to run on the theta rhythm continuously, while keeping full clarity and the ability to act in the world. It is a neurobiological paradox. To the instruments, the person is asleep or hypnotized, but in practice they are more present and more effective than everyone around them. It is a state of flow 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The boundary of the I begins to dissolve. The part of the brain that gives us the sense of where our body ends and the universe begins winds down its activity. The feeling of loneliness becomes biologically impossible. You cannot feel alone if your brain no longer builds a wall between you and the world. The chemistry of happiness changes too. We are used to cheap dopamine spikes, a like, a tasty meal, a new purchase, a spike, then a crash, then the need for more. It is an addict's seesaw. The brain in a state of surrender runs on different fuel. It produces a steady, elevated level of serotonin and endorphins, but above all, it begins to synthesize substances that are normally released only at the moment of birth and at the moment of death. It is a state of permanent ecstasy, though not a loud, excited ecstasy. It is a quiet joy running in the background. The body stops burning energy fighting reality, so the reward system stays switched on. The person feels good simply for existing. They need no outside stimulus. For them, breathing is already an intense experience, but all of this happens inside us. What about the world out there? Does it change just because we changed on the inside? The ego is silenced, the brain calms down, peace becomes the default state. A skeptic would say, fine, let the monks and the saints feel happy. It's just a game of hormones. The world out there doesn't change because of it. A wall is still a wall, and a losing lottery ticket is still a losing lottery ticket. Today we challenge that view. We are stepping into the most unstable and dangerous territory of all, the territory of chance. The question we asked is one that most mathematicians would call absurd. Can an inner state of trust in God influence the random number generator we call the universe? Can the renunciation of control alter the route of a bus, the trajectory of a bullet, or the behavior of the financial markets around one specific person? The answer that came out of the data destroys the foundation of classical probability theory. Ordinary life obeys a predictable statistical distribution. Most events are average. Extraordinary events are, by definition, rare. The probability of running into exactly the right person by chance in a city of millions, at the precise second you need help, is 1 in a million. It is statistical noise. You cannot count on it. And yet, when you analyze the biographies of people who lived by the principle of radical trust, an anomaly becomes obvious. The famous bell curve of statistics gets bent out of shape. Improbable, life-saving coincidences happen in their lives with a frequency that is mathematically impossible. The psychologist Carl Jung called it synchronicity. Religion calls it divine providence. Our analysis describes it as the chaos around the person appearing to subside, as if they had tuned in to a hidden signal that puts things in order. In practice, the whole thing works in a curious way. Your life is like a path through a dense, dark forest. The ordinary person, driven by the ego, tries to hack a clearing by force. They burn energy, snap branches, plan the route with an out-of-date map. They keep walking into trees. It is a life with a high coefficient of friction, where you fight the world and the world fights back. The person in a state of trust throws away the map and the machete. They simply say, "Lead me." And at that moment, something strange happens. They start slipping into what we might call flow corridors. The branches seem to move aside a second before impact. They reach a clearing at the exact moment a caravan is passing through. Why does this happen? The most elegant explanation has to do with information theory. The universe is a gigantic stream of data. Every second, trillions of events take place. The solutions to all of your problems already exist inside that stream. The right person is already walking down the street. The money you need is already sitting in somebody's account, ready to be moved. The cure you are looking for has already been discovered. The ordinary man's problem is that he makes far too much noise. His ego, his fears, and his relentless wants create powerful interference. He shouts, "I want and I'm afraid," so loudly that he drowns out the universe's navigation signal. He walks right past the correct door without seeing it, because he is busy planning how to knock down the wall. When you activate the protocol of total trust, you switch off your own noise. You become silence. And in that silence, you begin to pick up the signal of the ideal trajectory. Cases of miraculous escapes, like the person who missed the plane that crashed or who was held up by 1 second and avoided an accident, often share the same account. Something held me back. I felt I shouldn't go. It is as if the person received an instruction straight from the source, a warning that nobody else heard. That stream works on a principle we might call necessary sufficiency. Resources arrive at exactly the moment they are needed for action, and in exactly the right amount. The life of a person like that looks terrifying to a financial planner. There is no safety cushion. The bank balance often hovers near zero, but the moment a bill comes due, the means to pay it appear. Not before, not after. It is like walking on water. As long as you keep moving, there is ground under your feet. If you stop to stockpile that water for the future, you sink. And why does the system work that way? Because a surplus of resources creates independence, and independence restores the ego. If you have $200 million in the bank, you stop asking what you should do. You start deciding for yourself. The channel of communication closes, and that is why the state of grace works only in a state of total dependence. This brings us to the most complex aspect of all, the law of reversed effort. The more you want something, the less likely you are to get it. Intense desire implies absence. When you shout, "I want to be healthy," you are affirming to the universe the fact that I am sick. You reinforce the reality of the illness. The one who trusts completely has no desires in that sense. He does not force reality with his "I want." He lives in a state of if it happens, good. If it doesn't happen, also good. And that is where the magic happens. The probability of a favorable outcome rises dramatically the moment the subject sincerely lets go of the outcome. To get it, you have to stop wanting it. Reality is a mirror. If you push against it, it pushes back. When you trust, you take the pressure off. Reality, with nothing left to resist, flows toward you. With a calm brain and the universe conspiring in your favor, surrender sounds like an easy road. But the data revealed a far harsher side to this journey. If we want to be honest, we have to look at the data that reality hands us. And reality has a way of reminding us that it has teeth too. We fed the system the biographies of hundreds of people who, according to the records, reached the highest degree of trust and surrender. And the statistics that emerged made us want to close our eyes. These people's lives were filled with pain, loss, humiliation, illness, and loneliness. But here a giant contradiction arises. If the universe loves the one who trusts it, why does it so often hit him so hard? If God is love, why do his most devoted servants so often end their lives in agony? This is the question that led us to formulate what we call the job algorithm. We asked the system to analyze suffering, and the answer was that suffering stopped being a flaw and became a function. What is it for? The answer was as cold as a medical report and as sharp as a scalpel. Suffering is a fine-tuning tool. Picture the human soul as a complex structure. Over the years, that structure accumulates the rust of habit, the scabs of selfishness, and, most importantly, false supports. We lean on money, on relationships, on health, on social status. We say, "I trust in God," but the unspoken sentence that comes right after is, "as long as I still have my paycheck and my health insurance." The absolute trust we are investigating does not tolerate competitors. To connect fully to an external power source, you have to cut every local wire, and that process is exactly what we experience as tragedy. The higher power acts by removing the crutches that keep us from learning to fly. You were leaning on your career collapses. You were leaning on somebody else's love, that person walks away. You were leaning on your physical strength, illness arrives. From the ego's point of view, it is a catastrophe. From the point of view of the job algorithm, it is a resource being freed up. As long as a person has a single earthly support left, they will cling to it tooth and nail. They will never know what real faith is. They will only know comfort. And comfort and growth are opposites. The process unfolds in 3 clear stages. The first is deconstruction. The system starts destroying your false identifications. You thought you were a successful businessman? It drives you into bankruptcy to show you that you are not your business. You saw yourself as the perfect mother. Your children spin out of control to show you that they are not your property. This hurts. It is like having your skin torn off, and the ego screams in protest. The second stage is the 0 point, total silence. The future does not exist. Hope in the worldly sense disappears. It is the critical moment when everything is decided. If the person manages to say yes to that emptiness, if they can accept the pain not as an enemy but as medicine, the third stage begins. Reconstruction. A new personality starts to be assembled, but this time it is not built on fear and desire. It is built on purpose. New neural connections form stronger ones, but now they have been tempered in fire. It is no longer the naive trust of a child. It is the conscious trust of a warrior. And why does the process have to be so brutal? Because the human psyche is incredibly resistant to change. As long as we are comfortable, we do not evolve. We only transform under pressure. A diamond is born only under immense geological pressure. Without it, it would be nothing but a lump of coal. The Creator, it seems, loves us too much to leave us as coal. So he switches on the press. Seen from this new angle, what we call evil reveals itself as a painful teaching method. A life of trust is agreeing to lie down on an operating table without anesthesia. It is like the process of forging a sword. First the metal is heated white hot, then it is struck over and over with a hammer, and finally it is plunged into ice water. If the metal could feel, it would believe that the blacksmith was a sadist. But the blacksmith knows that this is the only way to create a blade that will not shatter in battle. The question is, what battle are we being prepared for? The good news is that the trials are always measured out with precision. The load is calculated individually, right up to each person's limit. You will be bent to the exact point where you do not break, but where your pride shatters. And suffering has power over us only for as long as we resist it. At the moment of total acceptance, the pain changes quality. It stops being torment and becomes work. Hard, heavy work, but full of meaning. The person starts to face the blows of fate the way an athlete faces the pain in the gym. It hurts, good. That means I'm growing. That makes them unbeatable. We are used to thinking that history is written by the winners. That the course of civilization is set by great armies, gigantic budgets, and complex geopolitical strategies. In books, we learn the logic of power. The strong devour the weak, and whoever has the most gold makes the rules. And most of the time, that appears to be true. But when the data from the crucial moments of human history is analyzed, the system finds cracks in that logic, anomalies. Inexplicable turning points, where the tide of history was turned not by emperors with their legions or bankers with their vaults. It was turned by solitary individuals, people who, by every law of sociology and economics, had zero resources. No army, no money, often not even a formal education. They had only one thing, an absolute, irrational, unshakable trust in the force that was guiding them. It is as if the trust of these people created an invisible force capable of bending the course of history. The story of Joan of Arc is a perfect example of this. Picture the scene. The 15th century, France practically in ruins, army morale on the floor, and a weak, indecisive king. And then an unexpected variable appears, an illiterate 17-year-old peasant girl. From the standpoint of military strategy, her chances of influencing the outcome of the war were nil. She should have been laughed at, ignored, or killed in the first village. But she reaches the king, she is given an army, and within days she breaks the siege of Orleans, a task that France's best generals considered impossible. Historians talk about charisma, about luck, about a moment of collective psychosis. The analysis, however, points to something else, the resonance of absolute certainty. Joan of Arc did not think she was going to win. She did not hope to win. She knew. For her, the reality of victory was already an accomplished fact, information received directly from the system administrator. An ordinary leader, even the most gifted one, always spends part of his energy on doubt. What if it doesn't work? What if we are defeated? Those micro-vibrations of fear are read by a crowd instantly. The person in a state of absolute trust has no doubts. There is no plan B because she is not the author of plan A. When the soldiers looked into that young woman's eyes and did not see one drop of fear or hesitation, their critical thinking switched off. Her certainty became contagious, spread through the army, and rewrote the morale of thousands of men. They became an extension of her will, and her will was an extension of a greater will. A force like that cannot be stopped by human strategies. It is like trying to stop a tsunami with a garden fence. The same pattern repeats itself even more clearly with the early Christians against the Roman Empire. On one side, the most powerful war machine of antiquity, with its legions, its bureaucracy, and its total control. On the other, nothing but scattered groups of outcasts, people like slaves, women, and the poorest of the poor. They had no weapons and no political program. Their strategy was to turn the other cheek and walk to their deaths singing. From the standpoint of game theory, that is a losing strategy. If you take a beating and do not hit back, you simply die. Game over, and Rome acted logically. It switched on its machine of repression with executions, arenas, and lions. The goal was simple: to instill fear. But the empire ran into people who had deleted the fear of death module. You cannot terrorize somebody who considers death a victory. When the Romans saw Christians dying with a smile and a prayer for their executioners, the Roman mind went into a tailspin. It made no sense. The crowd in the Colosseum did not see the victim's defeat, but the victim's moral superiority. The empire broke its teeth not against weapons, but against absolute trust. They won without striking a single blow, rewriting the moral code of civilization through sacrifice. A person's influence on history appears to be directly proportional to the degree to which they have renounced their own ego. The less I there is in you, the more force flows through you. Archimedes said, "Give me a place to stand, and I will move the earth." The ordinary man tries to move the world while standing on the world itself. The one who trusts in God places his fulcrum outside the system. He stands on the absolute. That is why his smallest effort, a word, a gesture, can set off seismic tremors. The actions of such people often look like madness to their contemporaries because they do not follow linear logic. Francis of Assisi stripping naked in the town square, Mahatma Gandhi taking on an empire with fasting and silence. They are not following a human plan. They are responding to an impulse that sees the entire chessboard across the centuries. These forged souls changed history. But what if their influence went deeper still, capable of altering not just people, but matter itself? We are about to descend to the most fundamental level of existence, where the religion of the ancients and the physics of the future meet. This is where reality gets strange. Quantum physics showed us something that our intuition refuses to accept. The famous double-slit experiment reveals that the fundamental particles making up everything that exists, from the stars to the cells in your body, behave differently when they are being observed. When nobody is looking, an electron acts like a wave of possibilities, passing through several places at the same time. But the very instant a detector is switched on to see which way it went, the wave of possibilities collapses, and the electron becomes a solid particle at a single point. The simple act of observing does not merely record reality, it creates it. Physicists usually say that this applies only to the microscopic world, that in our world of tables and chairs, things are stable. But that stability is an illusion, held in place by a collective agreement. We are 8 billion observers voting every second for the solidity of walls, the heat of fire, and the strength of gravity. We hold the world in its usual state by the force of our shared expectation. This is what is called consensus reality. But what happens when somebody comes along who withdraws from that consensus? Somebody who stops believing in the rigidity of physical laws and starts believing in the unlimited will of the Creator. Think about the story of walking on water. To physics, it is impossible. Water is less dense than the human body. But why does gravity work? Because we expect it to work. Our collective consciousness collapses the wave function of reality into the state, I am going to sink. A master like Jesus in this model is an observer who does not carry the expectation of sinking. His consciousness is fully synchronized with that of the universe's chief programmer. And for the programmer, there are no limitations. If he decides that the parameter density of water at one specific point in space should change, it changes. The master is not breaking the laws of physics. He is observing a different reality. And for him, as a privileged observer, that reality manifests. The Apostle Peter walked on water too. As long as he kept his eyes fixed on the master, he was inside the master's field of faith, and he walked. The instant he looked at the waves, he returned to the consensus of reality, felt fear, and switched the logic of the world back on. And immediately he began to sink. Physics reclaimed its rights the second fear returned. Fear is the glue that keeps us stuck in the material world of limitations. Faith is the solvent. Look at the phenomenon of healing. Your faith has healed you. There are countless records of spontaneous remissions where inoperable tumors vanish overnight. Medicine has no explanation. The quantum model explains it this way. The body is not a fixed sculpture. It is a cloud of particles that die and are reborn every instant. The new cells copy the diseases of the old ones because there is a matrix, a memory. Your consciousness remembers, I have a disease. And it forces the new cells to build themselves according to the blueprint of the illness. It is you who, with your fear and your conviction, collapses your body into the state of the sick at every moment. Absolute surrender is a reset of that memory. The person says, I hand my body over to you. I no longer consider it mine. I no longer consider it sick. I simply stop thinking about it. They stop being the observer of their own illness, and in that vacuum of observation, a higher observer takes over, and he sees the person as healthy. His gaze reassembles matter according to the original perfect blueprint. But there is one critical condition. This works only in the total absence of doubt. Doubt is the noise that stops the signal from getting through. If you believe 99.99%, you are still going to sink. That 0.01% is enough to activate the standard laws of physics. This is why true miracles are so rare. You cannot try to believe in order to get a miracle, because the very intention of getting something for yourself is born of the ego. Miracles are a side effect, a bug in the matrix that occurs when somebody is so absorbed in God that they simply forget the rules of the world. The world around a person like that becomes fluid, malleable. Reality becomes clay. But are we ready to live in a world like that? A world without guarantees where the walls can disappear? We love our prison because it is predictable. And how does society, which adores its concrete cells, react to somebody who has learned to walk through walls? But if a person can, in theory, bend reality, they ought to be celebrated, right? The analysis of what actually happens, however, is far darker. A human being in a state of absolute trust can, in theory, interact with reality in a way that defies the laws we know. He becomes a point of flexibility in the rigid fabric of the universe. Sounds incredible, doesn't it? Logic would say that a person like that should become a world leader, a star, somebody everyone seeks out in order to warm themselves in their light. But the analysis of what actually happens is far darker. Society's reaction to somebody who has woken up is not admiration. It is irritation, fear, and in the end, aggression. What happens is that this person stops vibrating at the same frequency as society. Modern society, our Babylon, runs on a very simple and very effective code. Its main algorithms are scarcity, competition, fear of the future, and the need for outside validation. And into the middle of that machinery, where everyone is running in the same direction, comes a person operating on the trust protocol. He is sand in the gears. In an ordinary office, everyone is stressed, racing the deadline, scheming against one another. And in the middle of them stands our hero. Calm, absolutely calm. The boss shouts that if the project is not delivered, everyone will be fired. He answers, not with words, but with his state. God's will be done. If they fire me, it's because my time here is over. His colleagues' reaction moves from bewilderment to hatred, because his peace exposes their slavery. A free man among slaves does not inspire freedom. He inspires the urge to kill him, so that his existence stops being a constant reminder that there is a way out of the cell. This man becomes impossible to manage. The whip does not scare him, and the carrot does not tempt him. He becomes uninteresting for conversations about prices, politics, and gossip. He drifts away. Friends leave, relatives accuse him of joining a cult. But what looks like final isolation is only the filter for the deeper solitude that all of us face. The fear that holds up the entire edifice of our neurotic civilization, the fear of death. To the ego, death is total system failure. It is the blue screen, the complete wipe. That is why it clings to life so desperately. For the person living in trust, death flips its sign. It stops being an end and becomes a transfer. Imagine that you are playing a game. Your character runs, fights, collects items. The ordinary player has forgotten that he is sitting in front of a screen. He believes that he is the character. When the character dies, it is a tragedy. The player who has woken up, however, remembers that he is the player. The character is only an avatar. When the avatar wears out, the player simply takes off the virtual reality headset. The game is over. Reality has begun. Death, in this model, is the completion of the upload. Everything that truly matters, love, wisdom, experience, has already been saved to the cloud, to eternity. The body is just hardware that can be discarded. All of this leads us to one last question, perhaps the most important of all. What would happen if not just one individual, but a critical mass of people activated this protocol at the same time? What would happen if billions of us said, "We trust in God, not in presidents and bankers"? The system predicted an outcome that it named the Great Collective Awakening. The global economy, built on the manufacture of dissatisfaction, would collapse. The fashion industry, the luxury industry, the entertainment industry, everything that serves to distract us from our own emptiness would become obsolete. Wars would become technically impossible. How does a general command an army of soldiers who refuse to kill? After this whole journey, the theory is clear. But the question that echoes is, so what now? How do I actually do this? An analysis of all of humanity's spiritual practices reveals one universal algorithm. We call it the access code. The first step is the declaration of bankruptcy. You have to stop and honestly admit, I can't handle it. My control is an illusion. I don't know what I'm doing. The second step is silence. Find time, not to ask, but to listen. Just sit and watch the noise of your mind without taking part in it. The third step is the leap in microdoses. Start with a small worry, a problem at work, a bill to pay. Hand it over consciously. Say, I'll do what I can, but the outcome is yours. I accept any result. And then actually let go. The fourth step is gratitude in advance. When a problem shows up, say thank you, not out of masochism, but out of trust. I don't understand why this is happening, but I know it is for my own good. Thank you for the lesson. The fifth and final step is service. Stop asking, what can the world give me? And start asking, what can I give the world today? At the end of all this analysis, the conclusion is dangerously simple. If you try to hold on, the one holding you is fear. You are hanging over an abyss, and your fingers are getting weaker. It is only a matter of time before you fall. If you let go, you do not fall down. You fall up. You fall into the arms that wove the galaxies and drew up your genetics. The experiment is over. The theory has been laid out. Now your practice begins. The ignition key is inside you. Take a deep breath and loosen your fingers. If you liked this investigation, subscribing to the channel helps us expand the Axiom Investigation Project. We would love to read your thoughts on the video's subject in the comments and your suggestion for the next topic to be covered. Tell us which city you are watching from. Thank you for staying with us until the end.